Hello and welcome to My Existential Crisis, the podcast where we talk about all the things that make us question our entire sense of self. My name is Madison Epley.
And my name is Jarod Shark.
And that's us this week. You'd think I'd know how to start this after 14 episodes, but I don't. And it's fine.
It's all right.
It's great. Yeah, it's great. We're doing great. How are you doing, Jarod? What's new since I talked to you last week?
I'm doing all right. This past week's been kind of, I don't want to say stressful, but just long. Work's been long and frustrating. It just is. There's a lot of things for me to complain about, but I'm not going to get into it.
Can you explain to me what you do for work quickly?
Yeah, I guess I can. I didn't do that.
I'm so sorry.
I didn't do that last time. So I work for Dedicated Nursing Associates, their staffing agency. When I started there last year, I was a recruiter, and then I got promoted to a training coordinator, which is basically just teaching people how to recruit and how to do my old job.
Gotcha.
So it's a little bit less of a workload. I like it a lot more. I think it's fun to train people how to do things.
Yeah.
But there's just, a lot of internal stuff that irks me a little bit, but it is what it is. Work, everyone complains about work, so it's not too big a deal.
I getcha.
And then so I'm a hypochondriac. I think everything's going to kill me. And I don't know if I told you or not, but back in January, I had a kidney stone.
Oh my gosh, those are the worst. They are awful.
You've had them before?
I had a UTI and a kidney stone at the same time.
So did I, yeah.
Really? It was
Yeah.
awful. I thought I was dying. It felt like I was giving birth.
Yeah.
I don't know what that feels like, but that's the closest thing I can describe it to.
Yeah, so it was like the beginning of the year. It was like the first week of January, and I had a stomach ache for the past couple days. I was like, oh, it's nothing. I must have eaten something. And then I woke up and I was on my way to work, and I had Levi with me, and I just whenever I turned the wheel on my car, I felt something pop.
Oh no.
And then I was like, oh, ow, that doesn't feel good. And then it just got so much worse. You know what it feels like. It was awful.
Yes, it's awful.
So I turned back around. Sammy had to take me to the hospital.
You think you're dying. You think you're dying.
Yeah, I thought my
that's...
appendix was bursting or something.
Yes.
I was very afraid.
Oh my gosh.
And then I got there, I was just in a wheelchair. I was like, ugh. And they're asking me to fill out all this stuff. And they're like, yeah, it's just a kidney stone. I'm like, just a kidney stone? That's great. I'm 25 years old. I shouldn't be getting these. And then it passed 3 weeks later. And then I got food poisoning.
Oh my gosh.
Immediately after that, yeah.
That sucks so bad. I've never had food poisoning.
I don't recommend it.
I know I wouldn't. I wouldn't.
But yeah, so I'm on good health insurance now, so I just made a bunch of appointments. This week I went to an ENT because I was worrying about this lump in my throat. Because I also thought that was going to kill me, and then the doctor was like, that's fine, it's perfectly normal, you have nothing to worry about.
What was it?
It was just so he's like, because you're skinny, it's easier for you to feel them.
Feel everything.
I was like, yeah, I was like, that makes sense. And then I told him I have acid reflux, and he's like, oh, well, that can cause lumps in the throat. So take Prilosec, you'll be fine. We'll order a sleep study because I stopped breathing in my sleep a lot.
Oh my gosh.
So,
Jarod, you're dying.
That's been my mental state for the past year. It's just that I'm gonna die, but I think I'm okay. I've been drinking a lot of water, a lot more than I usually do. So, yeah.
Good, awesome. That's amazing.
How was your week?
It was good. Nothing too exciting. I don't know if you listened to a couple episodes back, but I was really into rug cleaning videos.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and that evolved from my love of house cleaning videos and extreme hoarder cleaning videos. I don't know why. It's just I love that. Things getting so gross to so pretty and clean. I love it. But that has evolved now to hoof cleaning videos.
Oh, I've seen those where they go in with the chisel and everything.
Yes!
Yeah,
I don't know why.
Fun.
I love those. videos and like sheep shearing videos. I love watching those. That has evolved to like vet videos. I've been watching like Bondi Vet and like it's like Australia or New Zealand. I don't know.
What is Bondi
It's like
Vet?
this vet. And it's just this vet, and they just take different cases. They take everything from, like, farm animals to, like, there was a snake who had, like, ovarian cysts or something.
Oh, shit.
She didn't make it, unfortunately.
Oh, no.
But it's really cool to see all the different cases. Like, I've learned a lot about, like, what's it called? Snail poison or something like that dogs can get into. I forget. But, like, it's green, and, like, this one person tried to poison, they did. They poisoned someone's dog with it.
Oh, my God.
On purpose. Yeah.
Jeez.
It's crazy. But, yeah, so rugs have turned into hoof videos, into Bondi Vet.
That's a really big transition, I think.
Yeah, it is really well because like in between there was like a video or two I was watching like horses giving birth, and then like, it just kind of escalated from there.
I've seen like the giraffe videos of giraffes giving birth.
Those are so cool to me.
They just like plop right out.
They pull them out. Yeah, they do, but like people have to with the horses, they have to like help them out sometimes.
Oh, that's
and,
right.
Like, pull on the legs. It's crazy. Did I tell you I wanted to be like an OBGYN at some point?
I think probably at some point you told me that.
It was like a very brief phase in high school where I was like, I don't know what I'm doing in my life, and like maybe I'll be a doctor, like everybody wants their kid to be. I'm not doctor material, but I really am fascinated by everything about birth.
And just yanking babies out of things.
Yes, it's so fascinating to me. I love that. I love it so much.
Well, there you go.
Yeah, so that's been my life.
Life is short, Madison. Pursue your dreams. I think you should go for it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's about it.
Cool.
I don't know.
Nice.
Again, I apologize. I always think it's going to be short, and then it's not when I actually do the research. This was a much longer story than I thought it was.
I'm excited.
But I like this one a lot, so hopefully you do too.
Okay.
Just to run through some of my sources, because I always forget to do that. The Cut was a really big one. Parade, Marie Claire, Time, and CNN. Those were the 5 that I predominantly used.
I also had CNN for mine.
And this is the story of the Watcher House. Do you know this one?
I feel like I've heard of it. Like that name sounds familiar, but I'm not too sure. They
just released, like, it's either a movie or just like a mini series on Netflix about it. I haven't watched it yet, but I kind of like the last one. As soon as I heard of this story, it's like has not left my soul. It won't leave. It's just haunted me. So I'll just, it really is. You'll get it why. All right, I'm just gonna jump right in. So in June of 2014, Maria and Derek Broaddus were getting ready to move into their dream home with their 3 children, aged 5, 8, and 10, at 657 Boulevard in Westfield, New Jersey. The house had 6 bedrooms and was located just a few blocks away from Maria's childhood home, and it was in one of the top 30th safest neighborhoods in the U.S. Many residents in Westfield compared their town to Mayberry from the Andy Griffith Show, and if you don't know what that is, it's really just like the ideal picturesque 1950s town where like neighbors greet you with a handwritten note or like a freshly baked pie when you move in. Like everyone's super nice and very warm.
It sounds like Don't Worry, Darling. Like that neighborhood.
It does, and that's kind of like what it is like, but on a less tormented level in some ways. I guess we'll get some torment in here. You'll see.
Good.
Yeah, it's about 45 minutes from New York, and it's mostly home to very well-off families. The most pressing issues that locals complained of were quote-unquote unconstitutional policing, which translated to aggressive parking enforcements for the predominantly white neighborhood. So that's really the hardest thing that they had to deal with.
Yeah.
Local residents have said that the Boulevard, the street that the Broadduses lived on, had some of the most desirable homes in town. Quote, "You made it if you lived on Boulevard." So needless to say, this was huge for the family. They worked really, really hard to get there. Derek grew up in a working class family in Maine, where he moved his own way up the corporate ladder at an insurance company in Manhattan and became senior vice president. So he really did start from the bottom and worked his way up. The house was worth $1.3 million, and they bought it just after celebrating Derek's 40th birthday. The kids were thrilled. They were running through the house, excited to just choose out their own bedrooms. There were multiple fireplaces in this house, so they were even like debating which one they thought Santa would come down on Christmas. The kids, I know, right? Like multiple fireplaces, not just the one.
It's so cozy.
The kids were bonding with the other neighborhood kids, playing in the yard while their parents met the new neighbors. And it was just like the picturesque conclusion to a movie where they're finally getting their happy ending after years of hard work. Like this should be the happy ending. So, very excited to make the house their own. They started putting even more money into the house for renovations. And 3 days after closing, before the family had even moved in, Derek was at the house doing some light renovations on his own, and he decided to check the mail. There wasn't much, just some bills and a few pieces of junk mail, and a card-shaped envelope. The envelope was addressed to, quote, the new owner in thick, clunky handwriting, and at first the letter started off very sweet.
Dearest new neighbor at 657 Boulevard. Allow me to welcome you to the neighborhood.
However, things quickly take a turn. The letter continued,
How did you end up here? Did 657 Boulevard call you to its force within? 657 Boulevard has been the subject of my family for decades now, and as it approaches its 110th birthday, I have been put in charge of watching and waiting for its second coming. My grandfather watched the house in the 1920s, and my father watched it in the 1960s. It is now my time. Do you know the history of the house? Do you know what lies within the walls of 657 Boulevard? Why are you here? I will find out.
This is starting to sound familiar again. Like, I think I have heard this.
Yeah.
It's creepy.
Yeah.
Ugh,
yeah.
Okay.
It's very unsettling.
Mm-hmm.
The letter went on to identify the Broaddus' Honda minivan, as well as the workers who were renovating the home. Quote,
I see already that you have flooded 657 Boulevard with contractors so that you can destroy the house as it was supposed to be. Bad move. You don't want to make 657 Boulevard unhappy.
Oh no.
Seemingly having spotted the children when they were playing in the yard, the letter writer wrote, quote,
You have children. I have seen them. So far, I think there are 3 that I have counted. Do you need to fill the house with the young blood I requested? Better for me. Was your old house too small for the growing family? Or was it greed to bring me your children? Once I know their names, I will call to them and draw them to me.
Without any return address, the person concluded with,
Who am I? There are hundreds and hundreds of cars that drive by 657 Boulevard each day. Maybe I am in one. Look out all the windows you can see from 657 Boulevard. Maybe I am in one. Look out any of the windows in 657 Boulevard at all the people who stroll by each day. Maybe I am one. Welcome, my friends, welcome. Let the party begin.
It was signed,
The Watcher.
in cursive font. Just your face.
Well, I mean, your delivery of it too got me too, but just like, yeah.
I'm hoping that I can find
It's spooky.
a voice overlay to make it sound
Like ominous.
Yeah, but if I don't, I tried.
It was good.
So if you don't hear an ominous voice at this point,
Gave me chills.
I did my best.
It did what it needed to.
Good. So at this point, Derek is reading this letter, and it's past 10 o'clock, and he is alone in the house. So he raced around, turned off all the lights so no one could see inside, and he called the Westfield Police Department. The police officer gets there, reads the letter, and asks, what the fuck is this? And he asks if Derek has any enemies, and of course, Derek says no, he just moved in here. Sorry, he hadn't even moved in here. They just bought the house. He knew nobody in the neighborhood. There was no enemies back at home, nobody. So Derek ran back to their old house to get his wife and kids, who were still living back at their old home. And immediately they emailed the couple who sold them the house, John and Andrea Woods, and asked them if they knew who the watcher might be or why they wrote to them. The letter said, quote,
I asked the Woods to bring me young blood, and it looks like they listened.
At this point, Derek is thinking, did they know about this? Did they know who this was that was doing this? Did they plot this? So the next morning, Andrea Woods does reply, and she said that they have received a letter from the watcher, which she recalled was odd, but it was not menacing. It was more just strange and just weird. And it mentioned something about observing them, but they didn't think anything of it and just threw it away, and they didn't receive anything else afterwards, so they just kind of forgot about it. They thought maybe it was just a prank. And again, they lived there for 23 years and they never received anything else. So it just they just forgot about it. It didn't cross their mind again. They said that they also just never felt watched. They hardly even locked their doors. It was a very safe neighborhood. So that same day, Maria went to the police with the Woodses, where they were told not to tell anybody about the letters, including their new neighbors, because now all of them are suspects.
Yeah, that's a good point.
On high alert, Derek canceled a work trip so he could be with his family in case anything happened, and Maria would be careful to always have the children within watching distance from her. Anytime they were out of sight, even just around the corner, she would call for them to make sure that she could spot them. A few days after the first letter, Maria and Derek went to a barbecue across the street, welcoming them and another new homeowner into the neighborhood. Again, noting what the police said, they didn't tell anybody about the watcher, but they did keep a close eye on everyone to try to see if they could spot anything suspicious, kind of like piece out anything that they could find from them. And they, again, kept calling their kids to stay close, which Maria said must have made people think that they were crazy. And they didn't see anything really from this, but they still kept an eye on their neighbors. And a couple days later, they were giving a tour of the house to a couple, another neighbor from the block, and one of the wives said, it'll be nice to have some young blood in the neighborhood, which made Derek freeze.
Yeah, I don't like how they keep saying young blood.
It's not good.
Yeah,
not good at all.
Ominous.
Another morning, shortly after this, the Broaddus's general contractor came to work to see that a very heavy sign he hammered into the front yard had been ripped out. At this point, it had been 2 weeks since the first letter arrived, and Maria stopped by the house to look at some paint samples and check on the mail. Immediately, when she checked on the mail, she recognized the thick black lettering on a card-shaped envelope, and she called the police right away. Once there, she and the police read the letter. It was misspelled, but it was made out to Mr. Derek and Mrs. Maria Broaddus instead of Broaddus. Of course, Maria's thinking, had the watcher heard the contractors calling for them? Were they checking her mail? How did they know? When were they watching? They didn't see anything suspicious. And the second letter said,
Welcome again to your new home at 657 Boulevard. The workers have been busy, and I have been watching you unload carfuls of your personal belongings. The dumpster is a nice touch. Have they found what is in the walls yet? In time, they will.
The watcher also knew the children's nicknames and birth order. He had heard Maria call for them, and he was watching them play.
I am pleased to know your names now, and the name of the young blood you have brought to me. You certainly say their names often.
The letter asks specifically about one of their kids in particular who had been apparently spotted by the watcher using an easel inside an enclosed porch.
Is she the artist in the family?
Continuing,
657 Boulevard is anxious for you to move in. It has been years and years since the young blood rolled the hallways of the house. Have you found all the secrets it holds yet? Will the young blood play in the basement? Or are they too afraid to go down there alone? I would be very afraid if I were them. It is far away from the rest of the house. If you were upstairs, you would never hear them scream. Will they sleep in the attic? Or will you sleep on the second floor? Who has the bedrooms facing the street? I will know as soon as you move in. It will help me to know who is in which bedroom. Then I can plan better. All of the windows and doors in 657 Boulevard allow me to watch you and track you as you move through the house. Who am I? I am the watcher, and I have been in control of 657 Boulevard for the better part of 2 decades now. The Woods family turned it over to you. It was their time to move on, and kindly sold it when I asked them to. I pass many times a day. 657 Boulevard is my job, my life, my obsession. And now you are too, Bratis family. Welcome to the product of your greed. Greed is what brought the past 3 families to 657 Boulevard and has now brought you to me. Have a happy moving in day. You know I will be watching.
Makes my skin crawl.
Yeah, it's not good.
How
Not good
many?
at all.
Well, I guess I don't want to spoil it, but this is only the second letter that they've gotten.
Yeah, this is the second letter, and this is
Okay.
2 weeks. 2 weeks
2 weeks
after
that
they
lived
had
there.
just bought the house. No, they didn't even lived there. Just bought the house.
Oh, so they're
They're
still
not
in the
even
process
living
of like
there.
moving in,
They're just renovating it and like moving things in. They haven't even started living there
causing a
full time
ruckus.
yet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh gosh. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, I've definitely heard it before, but I don't remember how
all
it's
of these
supposed to
things.
end. Yeah.
Yeah. So Derek and Maria stopped bringing their children to the new house. It was no longer a question if when they would officially move in, but if. Everything in them told them to not even risk it. And several weeks later, a third letter came.
Where have you gone to? 657 Boulevard is missing you.
At first, due to the town's high popularity and how difficult it was to purchase a house on that street, let alone that area, the Bratis' first thought was maybe that the watcher was someone who was bitter about losing out on a bid from the house, but the Woods confirmed, the previous owner, that the other couples who were bidding backed out willingly. One had found another house already, and the other person had a medical condition that made them have to come out, but still it was all willingly. No one was bitter in this sale. So the only logical conclusion was that the watcher was local. The mention of the contractors, knowing what the bedrooms were, hearing the children's nicknames, etc. The letters were even processed in Kearney, New Jersey, which was the USPS distribution center for Westfield. And the first letter was postmarked June 4th, which was before the sale of the house even went public. There was not even a for sale sign up in the yard. The only people who knew about this were the past owners and the people who were interested in buying the house. Nobody else knew. It was not public knowledge. The renovations of the house were mostly interior, and people who lived nearby said that they hardly noticed any of it. No noise, no nothing besides people really coming in and out. They didn't hear anything, not even the jackhammer in the basement. That's how, quiet this place was. So Derek and Maria, they showed the detective around the house. They showed him the easel that the watcher had mentioned, which was hidden from the street by bushes and trees. You couldn't see it from the street view. You could only see it by right behind the house or right next door, either from the sides or from behind. You couldn't see it just looking in. So someone had to have been lurking around the house at some point. Speaking to a neighbor, Derek was told about a family named the Langfords, and they lived between the two of them. So here was Derek and their family, the Langfords, and then the neighbor. They were sandwiching the Langfords. Cool. So Peggy Langford was in her 90s, and several of her adult children, all in their 60s, lived with her. The family was a bit odd, but harmless, the neighbor confessed. He even described one of Peggy's children, Michael, as, quote, kind of a Boo Radley character from To Kill a Mockingbird. So Derek was like, this is it. Case closed. The Langfords were right next to the easel. They could easily spot it. The family lived there since the 60s, when the Watcher's father began observing the house, apparently. The Langford patriarch died 12 years ago when the current Watcher said he had taken over the job. The Broadduses told the detective who was working on the case about this, but to their surprise, he already knew. In fact, they had even brought Michael Langford in for an interview shortly after the very first letter arrived, where he denied knowing anything about it. And despite this, the detective admitted that the narrative pretty much lined up perfectly, but there was no hard evidence. Short of DNA or an admission of guilt, there wasn't anything the police department could do about this at this point. Mm-hmm. So since Derek wasn't getting anywhere with the police, he decided to take up his own investigation. He became obsessed. He set up webcams around the house. He even made a map of the whole block, which showed exactly where the neighbors were, which neighbors moved in at which point, and he even drew like sight lines in for the easel and an approximate circle of earshot for who would have been able to hear Maria call their kids' names. Like, he... Think Charlie Day with the red line on a corkboard. Mm-hmm. Like, that's what this guy was doing. Yeah.
I gotcha.
They even hired a private investigator who staked out the neighborhood for any sign of someone who might be watching them. And he even ran background checks on the Langfords, but he didn't find anything. Derek also reached out to the former FBI agent who actually inspired Clarice's character in Silence of the Lambs, and they also hired another FBI expert to conduct a threat assessment. So they concluded that the writer was older, as it had a lot of old-fashioned standards for letter writing, the way that it signed their names, it dated like the weather and everything. The letter suggested that whoever it was read a lot because they had a large vocabulary and they had a certain way about piecing the words together that was not poetic, but like it was very much literary,
like traditional
in that way. Yeah, exactly. They also noted that this person was probably less aggressive than it sounds due to the lack of profanity and the ease of the language. So while they were angry, they didn't think that they would really act on these threats, but the letters had enough typos and errors to imply a certain erraticism about the person. They also noted that there was a seething anger directed at the wealthy in particular, as the Watcher wrote,
"Are you one of those Hoboken transplants who are ruining Westfield?"
The Watcher was also supposedly angry at the copious renovations that they were making, and the Watcher continued,
"The house is crying from all the pain it is going through. You have changed it and made it so fancy. You are stealing its history. It cries for the past and what it used to be in the time when I roamed its halls. The 1960s were a good time for 657 Boulevard when I ran from room to room, imagining the life with the rich occupants there. The house was full of life and young blood. Then it got old, and so did my father. But he kept watching until the day he died. And now I watch and wait for the day when the young blood will be mine again."
So Derek couldn't shake Michael Langford out of his mind, and to elicit a response, he sent a letter to the Langfords saying that the house was going to be torn down, but they didn't react to that at all or give him any kind of response. And the Langfords were actually interviewed more by the police, but they accused the Broadduses of harassment because this was coming from seemingly nowhere. They just kind of had a target on them. They had no proof. And Derek actually even got a lawyer to try to press charges against them. But again, there was not enough evidence to do that. It was all just circumstantial. Things kept getting worse. Maria began having nightmares of someone taking the children, and she was obsessed herself over which of her neighbors might be their harasser. Every day, she felt like she was walking on eggshells, having to keep one eye open and just be constantly on high alert. She was exhausted from being so paranoid. While the circumstantial evidence was there for the Langfords, other suspects couldn't be ignored. So the private investigators did find 2 child sex offenders with a few blocks of the house, and the house painter noticed some odd behavior. He noticed that the neighbors behind 657 Boulevard kept a pair of lawn chairs oddly close to the house. The older man would come and sit in the chair and face the Broadduses' house and just watch.
Mm-hmm.
Just watch. But nothing came from either one of those. So by the end of 2014, this was the year that they had bought the house. This was about 6 months later. The investigation was cold. There was no digital footprints, no fingerprints, and no way to track the letters at all. They didn't have any other options, so the Broadduses were like, let's just get a priest. Let's get a priest to just bless the house. That's the least we can do.
It's always the last step.
Exactly. So within a few months, the renovations were finished, complete with alarm systems and cameras to protect the family. Derek even searched to see how much trained German Shepherds would cost, and he even posted a job on a website for military vets, just asking them to do constant yard work just so that they could be there in case anything happened. But after all of this, Derek and Maria were talking and thinking, what is this for? Like, what is the cost of this? Not financially, but they didn't buy this house to be a fortress. They didn't buy this house to be under surveillance like this. They bought it to be their dream house where their kids could play and have a good upbringing. Were they willing to risk their kids' safety because of this? But more and more, the watcher continued to sound increasingly unhinged.
657 Boulevard is turning on me. It is coming after me. I don't understand why. What spell did you cast on it? It used to be my friend, and now it is my enemy. I am in charge of 657 Boulevard. It is not in charge of me. I will fend off its bad things and wait for it to become good again. It will not punish me. I will rise again. I will be patient and wait for this to pass and for you to bring the young blood back to me. 567 Boulevard needs young blood. It needs you. Come back. Let the young blood play again like I once did. Let the young blood sleep in 657 Boulevard. Stop changing it and let it alone.
At this point, the Broadduses had already sold their home. They had been living at Maria's parents for the time being while paying the mortgage and property taxes on 657. And the stress began to take a toll on their marriage. They fought constantly. They had trouble sleeping. Maria actually even saw a therapist after a doctor's appointment, and the therapist asked, "How are you doing?" The very first question. And Maria immediately burst into tears. And after that meeting, the therapist came to the conclusion that she had PTSD from all of this. Again, 6 months after the letters first arrived. That's how fast all of this is happening. Before they had even moved in, the couple decided to sell the house. Initially, they listed it for more than they paid to reflect the extensive renovations that they made, but with the gossip wheel churning, no one would bite. The couple sent a partial disclosure to interested buyers, which mentioned the letters, and they told their agent that they intended on showing the new family the letters in full to anyone who had their offers accepted. One of the agents told them that they were being unnecessarily forthcoming, but the family insisted. Derek said, quote, "I don't know how you lived through what we did and think you could do it to someone else."
Yeah.
So now 2 years had passed. The house is still in the market. The Broadduses even had a lawsuit pending against the Woods family for not disclosing this to them beforehand. They tried having the house demolished, but that was denied by the city. They wouldn't allow that to happen. So they were back to square one eventually. But months had passed at this point. Years. It had been like a year and a half at this point, and they hadn't heard from the watcher since. They had not received another letter. They did find someone who would rent the house. And 2 weeks after these new tenants moved in, the renter handed Derek a letter, the 4th letter.
To the vile and spiteful Derek and his wench of a wife, Maria. You wonder who the watcher is? Turn around, idiots. Maybe you even spoke to me, one of the so-called neighbors who has no idea who the watcher could be. Or maybe you do know and are too scared to tell anyone. Good move. I walked by the news trucks when they took over my neighborhood and mocked me. I watched as you watched from the dark house in an attempt to find me. Telescopes and binoculars are wonderful inventions. 657 Boulevard survived your attempted assault and stood strong with its army of supporters barricading its gates. My soldiers of the boulevard followed my orders to a T. They carried out their mission and saved the soul of 657 Boulevard with my orders. All hail the Watcher.
In this letter, the new tenants were also mentioned, which they were very spooked, but they agreed to stay if the Broadduses would install additional cameras around and inside the home, which they did. And finally, in this letter, the Watcher threatened revenge.
Maybe a car accident. Maybe a fire. Maybe something as simple as a mild illness that never seems to go away but makes you feel sick after day after day after day after day. Maybe the mysterious death of a pet. Loved ones suddenly die. Planes and cars and bicycles crash. Bones break. You are despised by the house, and the Watcher won.
Now, because of this fourth letter, they had DNA on the newest envelope from where it was licked. And they got it tested, and they found that it was sealed by a woman. But this latest development did not go anywhere. They tested it against Abby Langford, Michael's sister, a real estate agent, the previous owner, Andrea Woods. Other neighbors even volunteered to be tested as well, but none were a match. Nobody. And I thought, even if they tested Abby, could it be someone else? Yeah. But you can test like the familial DNA if there was like an approximate match, and it was nobody in the Langford house. Nothing made a match on this DNA, so it was not them. At this point, Derek knew that any chance of catching the Watcher was slim, and even then there would be minimal punishment because no laws were broken. Nobody did anything wrong. They just wrote letters. So the house is now rented to new tenants, but the rent isn't nearly enough to cover the mortgage. The neighbors actually blamed the Broadduses for the media circus and accused them of making it all up. Originally, the Broadduses turned down movie deals and like film deals that were coming out because of this, but in 2018, they did sell the rights to Netflix because they wanted their story to be told with their permission at least. This was because in 2016, a Lifetime movie was made with the name The Raven, and instead of The Watcher, the writer would sign off as The Raven. So they tried to press charges against that. They obviously couldn't win because it was different in some ways. But even with selling the rights to the story, the money wasn't enough to dig them out of the financial hole that this house brought on them. The pair reportedly had 2 requests for the show's production team. Don't use their names and make the family look as little like theirs as possible. In the summer of 2019, the house was sold for $959,000, which was $400,000 less than they had bought it for, with all the renovations, with all the money they spent, and they never even lived in it. And when the new owners moved in, the Broadduses gave them a note via their real estate attorney. They said, "We wish you nothing but the peace and quiet that we once dreamed of in this house." They also included a photo of the Watcher's handwriting just in case any new letters arrived, and to date, none have.
Damn.
And that is the story of the Watcher house.
That got me good. I think it's just the idea that, like you said, there wasn't actually any crime committed. It was just very threatening, very...
Exactly.
Imposing.
Even if somebody was found out, the very minimum they could do is like a restraining order or like try to press harassment charges. But even then, that's like a slap on the wrist. They can't. It's like
right.
kind of like stalking. It's really hard to get stalking.
So did they ever, like, whenever they were doing the renovations, did they ever, like, because the Watcher's constantly referring to what's inside the walls. Did they ever kind of like go in and see what was in there?
They did, actually. They did. They didn't find anything inside the walls. The only thing that they found was like old insulation. Like there needed to be more insulation put in, or that it was like rotting or something. But people did check the walls and there was nothing in there.
The thing at the end with the saliva makes me think that maybe they convinced like someone that they knew to lick the envelope.
Someone else to do it.
So it couldn't be traced back to them.
Yeah, that was my thought.
But yeah, I can't believe that they couldn't find a match for anybody. Spooky.
No.
And also just like, the thing with like being in your home and like your dream home is like you want to feel secure, right?
Yeah,
and protected
like
against
home,
anybody.
You're supposed to feel safe in your home.
And the fact that they didn't even get to live in it is just, that's upsetting.
Didn't even get to live.
Yeah. And they had all these plans and they put all this money into it and they lost so much money because of it.
Yeah.
That's just sad.
Yeah.
That sucks.
That's not good.
Big bummer.
Are you gonna make us happy, or are you gonna give us a bummer?
No. So mine is so I'd ask you about it. It's the Dyatlov Pass incident. You said you have heard of this, right?
I've heard of it, but I forget the details.
Okay. Well, have you ever gone like skiing or snowboarding or just been at like a winter resort or anything like that? No. Okay.
Never. I would die trying to ski. I'd break my legs. I fall standing up. I can't do anything.
You don't have
like
the coordination.
No, I don't.
Okay.
And I don't like the cold. I can't.
I love it. So I think it's so this wasn't like necessarily like a skiing expedition as it was like a hiking. I think they had skis, but it wasn't so much like they were in a resort. They were hiking through like a mountain range essentially in Russia.
Okay.
So
who were they?
So they were a group of students in they went to the Ural Polytechnical Institute in Russia. So yeah, there's a group of 9 hikers, all pretty young. And so basically the story is that in January of 1959, a 23-year-old hiker named Igor Alexeyevich Dyatlov led a journey to reach the peak of Otorten, a mountain in the northern Urals of Soviet Russia. So the young man brought a team of 8 experienced hikers, many from the Ural Polytechnical Institute, along with him for the adventure. Before he left, Dyatlov had told his sports club that he and his team would send them a telegram as soon as they returned. But that telegram was never sent, and none of the hikers of the so-called Dyatlov Pass incident were ever seen alive again. So, we don't know what happened like the following weeks, because, you know, they went on this expedition. They were expected to return that telegram. After they didn't, you know, I think they kind of gave them a couple days, and then they decided, okay, we should go out and search for them. So when their bodies were found in the coming weeks, there was something just like not right about them, because the majority of them were like hypothermia, right? It was just wickedly cold out there, which makes sense. But they had a lot of like strange and gruesome injuries that the investigators found out, and it just like they were like baffled by it, like they couldn't make sense of it, right? So some were missing eyes, another was missing her tongue. Yeah, so
oh my gosh,
it's just it's stuff that you wouldn't think would normally happen on a hiking expedition.
No.
Like those are very specific like mutilations. So, and a lot of like the internal and external injuries, they related it to the force of like a speeding car. It's like getting hit by a car.
Fuck.
So obviously like no one can make sense of it when they found these bodies. Like it was just unexplainable for the longest time. So the Soviet government decided to close the Dyatlov Pass case very quickly. And they only offered like very thin explanations, which immediately raises red flags for me. So like, why did they want to close this case so quickly? Why did they just want to brush it off as a group of kids that died from the cold? Or hypothermia, because they were inexperienced and maybe something like an avalanche was at fault. But with that explanation, and I'm sorry, I guess I should say my sources too. So ATI, all that's interesting is the article that I'm reading from. I also pulled from the Smithsonian magazine. Interesting Engineering, there's an article, and CNN. All have different, similar views on what happened with the Dyatlov Pass mystery, with some of the more recent findings coming out in 2019. But anyway, so with that explanation of hypothermia, didn't really clear up any of the lingering questions that they had. So all of these people have been puzzling over the mystery of the incident for the past 60 years. So we still really don't have a definitive answer as to what happened. So the Russian government didn't reopen the case until 2019, when they kind of revisited this idea of an avalanche, but a more like targeted sheet of ice and snow flying at them, which is kind of what they concluded. But there's a couple other theories that they go into. So based on what was recovered from the cameras that the 9 students brought with them and the diaries that they had written in at the site of like their deaths, investigators were able to piece together that on February 1st, the team began to make their way through the then unnamed pass leading to Otorten. As they pushed through the hostile climate toward the base of the mountain, they were hit with snowstorms that ripped through the narrow pass. Obviously, decreasing visibility caused them to lose their sense of direction, and instead of moving to where they were going to go to send that telegram, they accidentally deviated west and found themselves on a slope of a nearby mountain. So the mountain is known as Kholat Syakhl. I think Syakhl. I'm not sure I'm pronouncing that correct. But basically,
better than I can do.
Yeah, it's very, very Russian, very Soviet. But basically, it just translates to dead mountain. So kind of dead ringer for what happened. But basically, that translation comes from the indigenous Mansi people of this region. And we'll go into those people later. And to avoid losing the altitude that they had gained, or perhaps simply because the team wanted to practice camping on a mountain slope before their ascent to Otorten, they called camp to be made for the night. So on this like really dangerous mountainside.
Yeah.
It was on this mountainside that all 9 hikers of the Dyatlov Pass incident would meet their demise. When February 20th rolled around and there was still no communication, still no telegram from these hikers, that's when they mounted the search party. So it was a volunteer rescue force that had trekked through the Dyatlov Pass. They found the campsite, but not the hikers. So they kind of spread themselves out a little bit. Military and police investigators were also sent in to determine what happened to the missing team. When they arrived on the mountain, the investigators were not hopeful. So the group of investigators was made up of experienced hikers, and the route that they had chosen was very difficult. And accidents, slips, falls, things that could have caused the hikers to go missing were a very real danger. Gosh, I just destroyed my desk. With the hikers, I'm getting excited. I'm using my hands a lot. With the hikers having been missing for so long, investigators expected to find an open and shut case of a horrific accident on treacherous ground. It's like once they find them, they're like, oh yeah, this is what happened. But because of all those injuries, led to a lot more unanswered questions. So they found the bodies, yet the state they found the bodies in was very intriguing and difficult to place one singular accident. So 6 days later, on February 6th, is when they started to find the bodies turning up. And that's kind of when the true mystery starts. So when they arrived at the campsite, the first thing that they noticed was that the tent they were sleeping in had been cut open in a way that it was from the inside and not like the outside going in. So they weren't
not like an animal ripping into it, like someone cutting out of it.
Right. So they were like perfectly safe and warm in their tent, but something something was stressing them out. Something was making them panic. And then it was like almost completely destroyed. Meanwhile, most of the team's belongings, including several pairs of shoes, had been left at the camp. So they found 8 or 9 sets of footprints from the team, many of which clearly made by the people with either nothing on, like no shoes, or socks. Some of them just with socks on, some of them with a single shoe on. So, and these tracks led to the edge of the nearby woods, almost a mile away from the camp. And keep in mind,
gosh.
I know, and that's like the first really confusing part, because keep in mind they're on this dangerous mountainside in the middle of winter in Russia. So freezing cold, like 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 feet of snow, like very, it's not likely that they would have gone out of that tent, like from the warmth and safety, without any of their shoes or clothes on.
Yeah.
So that part is kind of the biggest mystery. Like, why would they leave their tent in negative degree weather, which is ultimately what caused them to die from hypothermia, but again, with all these other injuries. So when they get to the forest edge, when it's like a mile away, underneath a large cedar tree, the team of investigators found the remains of a small fire and the first 2 bodies, Yuri Krivonoshenko, who is 23, and Yuri Doroshenko, 21. So despite temperatures of -13 to -22 degrees Fahrenheit,
Jeez Louise.
freezing, definitely would not be able to survive in that. So this was on the night of their deaths. Both men's bodies were found shoeless and wearing only underwear. So that kind of starts raising some questions, like why would they not be wearing their clothes if they decided to rip open their tent and flee? And then they found the next 3 bodies, those of Dyatlov, Zenaida, and Kolmogorova, who was 22. Rustam Slobodin was 23. They died on their way back to the camp from the cedar tree. So the first 2 bodies they found at the cedar tree, and then the next 3 bodies were kind of like somewhere in between the campsite and that forest encampment, or that forest where the campfire was.
And you said it was like a mile away from the
Yeah. And especially in the snow, like that would take a good 20, 30 minutes. Just walking through that, you would not survive that long. So while the circumstances are very odd, the investigators found that most of the causes of death were clear. All the hikers, they said, had perished from hypothermia. Their bodies showed no indication of severe external damage beyond what had been inflicted by the cold. So these first 2, or I guess 5 bodies were just deemed, hypothermia. Obviously, they're trapped under the snow, missing clothes. They could not survive. However, this doesn't explain why Doroshenko was brown-purple in complexion, or why he had gray foam coming from his right cheek and gray liquid coming from his mouth.
Fuck?
Yeah. So that also is, because I think that's the only body that they found that had this kind of discharge coming from, I guess you could call it. And furthermore, this didn't explain why the hands of the 2 hikers under the cedar were scraped away and the branches above them were torn down, as if the 2 men had tried to desperately seek shelter from something or someone in the tree. So kind of similar to how they like cut their way out of the tent in a panic. They were just like frantically scraping at this tree. Meanwhile, Slobodin had head injuries consistent with someone falling and hitting their head over and over and over again. So just like blunt force trauma, which normally you would think would be inflicted by another person. And Kolmogorova had a baton-shaped bruise on her side, or a baton-shaped bruise on her side. And these 2 hikers, as well as the others found by this point, were also generally underdressed and wearing some of each other's clothes, only supporting the idea that they'd fled suddenly and without adequate preparation into the freezing night, despite being experienced hikers. because they had gone on treks like this before and, came back alive. But it was like this set of circumstances was just so bizarre to see in a group of experienced hikers.
Yeah.
It wasn't until the other 4 bodies were found 2 months later that the mystery deepened even more.
Oh.
So the remaining hikers were discovered buried under the snow in a ravine 75 meters deeper into the woods, like past the cedar trees, past where that campfire was found. No, so this is known as like the Dyatlov Pass den, wherever they found these bodies in the ravine. And these ones told even more gruesome stories than those of the other members. So Nikolai Thibault Brignoles, who was 23, suffered significant skull damage in the moments before his death, while Lyudmila Dubinia, I'm really butchering these names.
It's okay. You're doing great, Jarod.
Thank you. And Semyon Zolotarov, who was 38, so he was the oldest of the group, had major chest fractures that can only have been caused by an immense force comparable to that of a car crash. So, yeah. For this one, I think it might be clear that the impact from that could be from them falling into the ravine.
Yeah.
I think that could explain their injuries, but as well as the fact that Dubinia was missing her tongue, her eyes, part of her lips, as well as some of the facial tissue and a fragment of her skull bone. So part of me wants to think that if she fell into the ravine, she had landed on her face or on her skull.
Yeah.
And like the jagged rocks might have like ripped that away. But that's just my theory as to it. It could have happened before she fell in also. They're not really sure. They also found the body of Alexander Kolovatov, who was 24 years old, in the same location, but without the same kind of severe wounds. So also in the ravine, but this second group of bodies suggested that the hikers had died at distinctly different times because they appeared to have been making use of the clothes of the people who died before them, the people who were found closer to the campsite. Yeah.
Shit.
So Dubinina, I've been saying her name wrong, Dubinina's foot was wrapped in a piece of Krivonoshenko's wool pants, and Zolotarov was found in Dubinina's faux fur coat and hat, suggesting that he had taken them from her after she had died, just as she had taken clothes from Krivonoshenko earlier.
Yeah.
So in this span from around the middle or end of January up until the end of February, there's a lot of different timelines here for when these people are dying and, taking clothes to try and stay warm. But the most mysterious of all this is that the clothes of both Kolovatov and Dubinina showed evidence of being radioactive. So due to this piece of evidence,
remember that.
Yeah. So there's a bunch of different theories as to like what all happened.
Okay.
So I think, with more bodies found, mystery of Dyatlov Pass incident only grew more baffling. Obviously, a lot of different things happening, a lot of moving parts.
That's an understanding. A lot of moving parts.
Yeah, there's a lot of things going on that we're not quite sure of. But the fact that the Soviet government had closed this case so quickly, so they found the bodies and they're like, okay, it was hypothermia, avalanche, whatever. They were hikers and they died. Not a big deal. They didn't really take into account any of these unexplainable injuries. So they closed this case very quickly, gave only vague causes of death, speculated that it was the hikers' own incompetence that caused their demise, or that it was a natural disaster like an avalanche.
Yeah.
Early on, many Soviets also suspected that the hikers' deaths were the result of an ambush by those local Mansi tribesmen that I mentioned. A sudden attack would account for the way the hikers fled their tents, their disarray, and the damage done to the second group of bodies, like that baton-shaped bruise, the missing eyes, the tongue missing, that kind of stuff. But that...
Were they able to tell if, like, how the tongue and the eyes were missing, or, like, when they were missing, like, before or after death? Do you know?
I'm not sure. I know there's a picture of it, which is really just terrifying, on one of these articles that I found. And it kind of shows really in depth, like, what it looked like from the cameras and like what their
Yeah.
injuries looked like. Most of them, obviously, you can see that they're covered. And I'll send you these pictures here, but you can see that they're not wearing much clothing. I'm trying to see if I can find Dubinina here, because her, like, it has a really good picture of her face with all of the. But I don't think they were able to determine when, like, the facial structure was messed up. Just that it was around the same time she had fell into the ravine.
I'm sure because it was so cold too. Like, it's really hard to tell.
Yeah.
It preserves everything so well. You can't really trust the decomp to help you out with that stuff.
Yeah, and I mean, a lot of the bruises and like discoloration too could be from just the cold as well, like frostbite and everything. But the idea that like the Mansi tribesmen were the ones that had attacked them was quickly, it was quickly like debunked essentially, because they were pretty much just like a peaceful tribe that lived near the mountain. They never really went after people like that. So it didn't really support violent human conflict as a possible explanation. So with that ruled out, they moved on to, and also just like the blunt force trauma was way past what like one human could inflict on another. Like they explained that it was more like a car crash. So like any one tribesman attacking these people, it would not give them the degree of their injuries like it was.
Yeah.
So next they moved on to a swift and violent avalanche. So the sound of snow collapsing, early warning sign of a deluge to come, would have frightened the hikers out of their tent in a state of undress and sent them sprinting for the tree line. An avalanche would also have been powerful enough to inflict the injuries that killed the second group of hikers, knocking them into the ravine and killing them. But the physical evidence of an avalanche just was not there, and the locals that were familiar with the terrain, people who lived kind of around the mountain range, said that such a natural disaster simply would not have made sense. There was also the fact that when the investigators found the bodies, they noted that there was no evidence that an avalanche had occurred anytime recently. There was no damage to the tree line. There is no debris or anything like that. I mean, some of the pictures show the tent like under the snow, but not enough for like a full-on avalanche. It was just more so the tent was destroyed and left behind, and until they found the bodies,
wind had blown the snow over, or underneath it.
Moreover, no avalanches have been recorded at that site before, and nor have there been any since. Furthermore, would the experienced hikers have made camp in a spot that was vulnerable to an avalanche? I know that they wanted to try and put it somewhere on the slope, but I think that they would have had more common sense to not put it like within any immediate danger.
Yeah.
Right. So it's kind of characteristic of most of these theories, like this, the idea of the avalanche was characteristic of most of the theories put forward in the early days of the mystery. It offered a quick, superficial, plausible solution to some aspects, but it doesn't account for some of the other things, especially like the radiation. So there's a lot of other alternative explanations that have been put forward in the 6 decades since. Some of them are very elaborate. Some of them are pretty concrete and straightforward. But the one thing that they look at is the hikers' strange behavior and lack of clothing, right? So they know where they're at. They know it's cold as hell outside their tent and they would not survive. So like the early stages of hypothermia might lead to irrational thinking and erratic behavior. Yeah, so maybe not as much blood flow to the brain could cause them.
And I know that also, like, whenever people go into hypothermia, they can feel really hot, so they might feel inclined to take their clothes off, which I can understand. But like, they were in the tent without clothes, it would presume, or they were like taking their clothes off in the tents before they came out. And then they were like trying to build a fire then, like they realized how cold they were. Something
doesn't add up. No, but that's a good point though. I guess I didn't think about that. Like the feeling of just being so cold it almost burns could explain why they weren't wearing clothes. Another thing I thought of was the fact that in order to maintain body heat, sometimes it's easier for like skin contact as opposed to like warm coverage of like cloth.
That makes sense.
So they might have been doing that like in the tent just to stay warm.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And then something caused them to flee their tent. And then like as they went after them, they realized, fuck, it's cold. I need to take their stuff and use it for myself because there's no saving them.
But like, I don't get the cutting out of the tent. Like, why not just open it from where it opens?
Yeah,
like,
it was
why
almost
do you
like
have to cut a hole in
sliced
it?
open. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't get that.
So hypothermia is like the end all be all for what everyone says, but it doesn't explain why they left their warm tent in like a panic in order to get outside into the freezing cold. So other investigators began to test the theory that the deaths were the result of some argument among the group that got out of hand, possibly related to a romantic encounter. There was a history of dating between several of the members that could explain some of the lack of clothes. But people who knew the ski group said that they were largely harmonious. I don't really think this theory holds too much ground because the extent of their injuries is so severe that, like, again, no one person could inflict that kind of damage.
I was going to say, you would at least see defensive wounds on somebody or, like, wounds on somebody from beating. You would see, like, a broken knuckle or, like, something from beating somebody up like that.
Right. And the fact that the two bodies found near the tree line were kind of clawing at the trees, trying to make shelter from something, doesn't really suggest that they were being attacked by a human. So with humans effectively ruled out as the culprits, some people thought that maybe it was like the KGB or murderous prison escapees or something like that. But again, like, no one can inflict that much damage. So another one was... I was going to
say, and also, even if it was, they're dying of hypothermia. Like, why would somebody be in the middle of nowhere?
Right.
Literally in the middle of nowhere. How would they survive?
Yeah. So with humans out of the way, with avalanches still kind of a possibility, they moved on to the idea of nuclear fallout or bomb testing or something like that because of the radiation that was detected on some of the bodies, leading to some very wild theories suggesting they'd been killed by some secret radioactive weapon after stumbling into like a secret government testing facility. Those who favor this idea stress the strange appearance of the bodies at the funerals. The corpses had a slightly orange and withered cast, and also that gray liquid that was being discharged from one of the mouths.
Yeah.
But if the radiation had been the cause of death, more than modest levels would have registered when the bodies were examined. The corpse's orange hue isn't surprising, given the frigid conditions in which they sat for weeks. They were partially mummified in the cold. Like you mentioned, they would have been preserved.
Yeah.
So that secret weapon explanation is pretty popular because it's partially supported by testimony of another hiking group, one that was like about 50 kilometers from the Dyatlov Pass on the same night.
Oh,
really? Yeah.
Damn.
So this other group spoke of strange orange orbs floating in the sky around Kholat Syakh.
Okay.
So this site that they had seen suggests that it was distant explosions or missile launches or something like that. And there's a picture that they provided, but it's not clear what it is because these are really old cameras. And the hypothesis is that the sound of the explosions might have drove the hikers from their tents in a panic. Half clothed, the first group died of hypothermia while attempting to take shelter from the blasts while waiting near the tree line.
Okay.
So to me, this one makes a little bit more sense to me than like a human attack. Just because of the fact that there was like a slight degree of radiation. It wasn't found on all of the bodies, which might suggest that they were protected partially from the snow or something along those lines. But the second group, having seen the first group freeze, determined to go back for their belongings, but they also fell victim to hypothermia. And then the third group of dead bodies got caught in a fresh blast into the forest and died from their injuries.
Gotcha.
So Lev Ivanov was the chief investigator of the Dyatlov Pass incident. He says, quote, "I suspected at the time and I'm almost sure now that these bright flying spheres had a direct connection to the group's death." And when he was interviewed by a small Kazakh newspaper in 1990, censorship and secrecy in the USSR forced him to abandon this line of inquiry. So again, like the Soviet Union was very quick to close.
Very hush-hush.
Yeah, they wanted to put a damper on this idea that it
down.
was some secret weapon testing facility. Other explanations include drug testing that caused violent behavior in the hikers and an unusual weather event known as infrasound, caused by particular wind patterns that can lead to panic attacks in humans because the low frequency of the sound waves create a kind of shock wave inside the body and just kind of throws you off your equilibrium. In the end, the hikers' deaths were officially attributed to a compelling natural force, and the case was closed. So not really a definitive answer, like I mentioned. I did state before that this case was reopened in 2019.
Yeah.
And this explanation is kind of similar to the avalanche theory, where, so they actually, it's strange where they pulled the inspiration for this theory from. They took a look at Frozen, the Disney movie, and so they, because I guess it's like a very accurate depiction of how snow and like large amounts of snow might move in a certain geographical condition.
I never thought Frozen would relate to this ever.
I didn't either.
Like, wait, which part of Frozen moved snow?
I don't know. I think maybe, was there an avalanche in that movie? I haven't seen it in a while. I don't remember.
I don't remember. It's been a long time.
Yeah, but
maybe there was an avalanche. Oh, I think I remember them like falling down a hill of some kind.
Maybe in the second one. But so they,
I don't know.
I thought it was interesting. So they reopened this case in 2019 to unravel this final piece of the puzzle, which could possibly explain every single one of the hikers' injuries, except save for the radiation, in my opinion. But so they took a look at Frozen. They reached out to the animators, asked them to share their code with them, and they put it in this simulation, coupled with data from cadaver tests conducted by General Motors in the 1970s to determine what happened to the human body when struck at different speeds, like for a car crash or something like that.
Yeah.
So this enabled the pair to show that heavy blocks of solid snow could have landed on the hikers as they slept, crushing their bones and causing injuries not typically associated with avalanches. But again, also, if that's the case, then they would have all been found in the tent dead, not miles away from the campsite. But if this...
Maybe, do you think they were trapped in the tent and they had to like cut their way out of it? But there was no snow on top of it.
So there was some snow. In some of the pictures you can see that there's not a lot, but enough to suggest that there was heavy snowfall, at least. But if there was this wind slab is what they call it. So it's like these different layers of snow and ice with basically like a heavier layer of ice coming at them really fast. There's like flux points and all this different like science explanation behind it. But it kind of, so for those who had sustained less serious blows, they were likely dragged, so they were still able to get up and move and stuff. So they dragged their injured companions out of the tent in hopes of saving their lives. So the slabs of snow would have had to be incredibly stiff and moving at a significant speed in order to inflict such violent injuries. With this theory, I think it's way too similar to like the avalanche, where there haven't been any recorded avalanches on this mountain before or after the incident, at least not to my knowledge. And this idea that they were all in their tent when this happened, it doesn't account for the fact that some of them had fell into a ravine 75 meters from the campsite. Doesn't account for the two bodies found a mile away by the tree line. There was just way too many different timelines for these things to just be chalked up to one big like wind slab killing them.
Yeah, and not just that, but you did say that like the third group of people, they had died. They were taking the clothes from the other ones to survive. Yeah, like that doesn't.
So there's a lot of different things. Some people think like a Yeti could be the possible reason, like a Yeti attack. I mean, that one's pretty paranormal. I like to entertain it a little bit, but I think the most likely explanation is because of the nature of the case being dismissed so quickly. And, with the USSR being a pretty beefy powerhouse at that point, wanting to keep any possible weapons testing a secret, I think just the fact that they had closed this case so quickly definitely points to some kind of explosion causing the hikers to flee their tents. I mean, if I was camping and I heard a loud explosion, I would probably want to get out as soon as possible, find some shelter.
You don't know if that could cause an avalanche. You don't know if that is an avalanche. You don't know what that is.
Also it would explain, for an explosion of that magnitude, it also could have caused a mini avalanche too, just like knocking them off their feet. It could have buried them in some snow, could have buried their tent, also causing them to try and cut their way out. I think the fact that they weren't clothed, or two of them weren't clothed, could explain the reasoning. Like, okay, well, they were trying to keep warm inside their tent, trying to make skin contact. And then as they're like forced out of their tent, the other hikers just had to survive, and they had to get the other clothes and keep warm. I think the blast also could have knocked the two of them, I think it was either two or three of them, into that ravine. If they were directly hit by the impact of it, it would cause that amount of radiation for that gray liquid to be discharged. I just think that with those glowing orbs and the other campsite seeing it from 50 kilometers away, it definitely leads to that as the most likely explanation. But what do you think?
So like my brain is leaning towards avalanche as the most logical, rational, simplistic conclusion. But there are too many missing pieces with that. That doesn't explain the radiation or the foam. And the other thing I was thinking about that's been really bothering me since you mentioned it is like the missing eyes and the missing lips and the missing tongue. And so like soft tissue is the first to really be like eaten from like an animal. So like if a bird were to try to get to it, or like if there was a bear. But I don't understand why nobody else's was eaten, or why there wasn't more of that body eaten then. Because while it's like the first to go, if something ate it, they would also eat more of it, or eat somebody else's. You know what I mean? That bothers me so much. And like you said about the rock, that makes sense too. But like, how would the eyes just be out, just not be there?
On one of these, there is. I want to try and find that picture. Because it shows like a close-up of her face, and I guess graphic content warning for you, but
that's okay.
Yeah,
I'm used to that. I talked about skin slippage 2 episodes ago.
I think I remember that. Skin slippage, yeah, that sounds gross. Oh yeah, here it is. Okay, maybe this isn't the one with the eyes missing, but definitely the most gruesome image that they were able to capture. So obviously this was one of the ones that was found, I think 6 months after, or maybe, because I think this was one of the ones found in the ravine.
Oh, fuck.
Yeah, it's very ghastly. I don't know if this is the one with her tongue missing. You can see both of her eyes are still there.
I see her tongue. I see a tongue, like something sticking out.
That first article that I'd sent has a bunch of other pictures in it too, but nothing was high quality enough to kind of capture the degree of their injuries.
The detail,
But yeah,
that's disturbing.
If you've never gone skiing before, I think this definitely would probably seal the
No,
deal to stay
not for
at
me.
home and stay warm.
Away.
Yeah.
Far away.
But yeah, that's the
No,
Dyatlov Pass
Oh,
incident.
I see the. Yeah. I'm just looking at these pictures now. I don't like this.
Yeah, it's just. Oh yeah, almost like 2 of these were found, like in a river. It looks like. That one kind of looks like maybe the eye is missing there. And the other ones were just kind of found in the snow. It looks like they had to dig them out. So definitely avalanche. Top contender for the theory. I'm particular to some kind of explosion. Just the fact that the case was dismissed like that.
Yeah, I agree, and especially that plus the radiation that bothers me so much that I don't like that. I can't get over that.
And that one,
yeah,
in that picture, they're
like that
so
at all.
happy. They're hugging.
I know.
They're laughing.
That was the first one I looked at, and then it just goes downhill.
Russia's a dangerous place.
Yeah.
Especially in the winter.
That's an understatement. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I'm excited to go to bed tonight.
Yeah.
This in my brain.
I think the Watcher House, too, is just, you know.
Yeah. Cool. Well, thank you for listening. Thank you for being on here again, Jarod. I really appreciate you. Thank you for bringing that gruesome.
Yeah, you're welcome.
To the picture. You're well. Yep.
Anytime.
Thank you. Love that. Loved seeing those images. It's great. You can follow us on ME Crisis Pod at. You can follow us on Instagram. I don't even know what the fuck I'm doing. You can follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at ME Crisis Pod, or send us an email. And I'm a mess today.
Fine.
I don't know what the fuck I'm doing.
Right.
I'm sorry, everybody. I'm the fucking mess. My Existential Crisis Podcast at gmail.com is our email. Feel free to request a topic that you would like us to cover. Like and subscribe for my belated birthday. Do that for me.
When was your birthday?
It was, Jarod, you wished me a happy birthday. It was in April.
Oh, shit. You're right.
You wished me a
I'm
happy
sorry.
birthday.
For some reason, I thought it was like a couple days ago. Like, did I forget? Oh, shit.
No, it was a month ago.
Okay.
I just didn't ask for that for my birthday, but now I am.
Yeah,
so make me happy, belated.
Okay.
Belated. Yeah. So, cool. Thanks, Jarod.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
See ya.
See you later. Bye. Cool.